My name is Kevin J. Johnston. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show, where we bring the news and the stories to you that no mainstream media is ever going to touch. Why? Well, because we got balls and they don't. It's really that simple. We've got a former member of parliament coming on the show tonight to talk about the Canadian banking system. It's about to be shut down. Without further ado, let's get right into this. Here's someone that knows Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, the turd, on a personal level. Someone who used to hold political office within Parliament of Canada, who's got amazing stories to tell, but knows everything that you all need to know now about the imminent collapse of the Canadian bank. Rob Anders, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you, sir.
All right. So let's get right into this. You were a member of Parliament in Calgary for how long?
18 and a half years representing Calgary West. I took over the seat from Stephen Harper.
Oh, did you?
I did.
Okay. So what Stephen Harper, for those who on TikTok from all over the world who don't know, was the previous prime minister to jihadi Justin Trudeau. I didn't hate him. I didn't hate Harper. I never actually found any of his policies to be annoying enough where I would say I hate the guy. My thoughts, Rob, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that the way he ran the country was okay. And I felt that if he had just maybe not done the one-trick pony thing, he put all of his belief in oil in Canada, and that tanked. The economy kind of went. Your thoughts? Let me hear your thoughts. Go ahead.
I wish Harper had been more of a social conservative. He was an economic libertarian, but even though he says that, he claims that, the CBC got a bigger budget. The bureaucracy grew. So we could have and should have done a lot more. Now, admittedly, to give him his credit, the GST went from 7 to 6 to 5. Good. And the taxation levels, income tax, dropped to the lowest level since Lester B. Pearson. But we had ministers like Maxime Bernier and others who actually wanted to cut more of their departments that Harper was akin to. So there were some guys, even in the cabinet, who were more conservative fiscally probably than him, Maxime Bernier, Jim Flaherty, etc. So I actually wish that he had been stronger as an economic libertarian, and I also wish there had been a socially conservative element there. But anyhow, it is what it is.
Yes. Rob, let's start talking about Parliament for a second.
Sure.
Someone who went to Ottawa all the time, and it was probably pretty cool for you because the taxpayers paid for your plane tickets.
I'll tell you this, though. You get tired of the plane. I did about 100 flights a year for over 18 years, about 2,000 flights in total. You feel like a part-time flight attendant. You don't like planes and airports after you do that many flights.
So it's not a perk.
No. You know how it works? Seriously? The first 2 months, you think, oh, I can go to Tuktoyaktuk. I can go to Toronto. I can go to Montreal. I can go to Vancouver. Oh, rock star. Then when your friends phone up and they say, hey, Rob, you want to go dancing? You want to go to a movie? You want to go out for dinner? You go, oh, I'm going to Tuktoyaktuk. I'm going to Toronto. I'm going to Vancouver. I'm going to Montreal. And so it's depressing because you lose all of your friends because they don't call you anymore because you can't go. You're voting. You're doing this, whatever. And then eventually, at some stage, you realize when you're 4.5 hours one way, 5 hours the other way, depending on headwind, it's your time when your cell phone doesn't ring, your staff can't get you, and you can just read a book or chill out and watch a movie, and it's chill. That's how it goes in terms of your thought process on plans.
Okay, very good. So the taxpayer paid for you to go. You had to go begrudgingly, usually it seems. You'd go to Parliament. So we have Parliament that you can see on television where you've got right now Trudeau's going, I'm a loser and I'm going to point my finger like this. And then Pierre Poilievre will say something clever over the floor. Both parties clap for their own party leader. Do any laws actually get made in that argument setting, or is it all done behind closed doors?
The way it usually works is that the bureaucrats have stuff they want to advance, regardless of what party's in power. And then they try to sell a minister. And then the minister, depending on whether they're kind of a sharp knife in the drawer or not, if they're not a sharp knife, they just go, oh, okay. And then they bring it to caucus and, try to pass it through type of thing. And if they are a sharp knife, which not all of them are, they figure out there's problems with it, etc. And then sometimes ministers will listen to backbench MLAs who have some knowledge more than they do, maybe on fisheries or whatever the issue is. And then sometimes they'll also listen to stakeholders and groups, and therefore, there can be amendments. But there are ministers who will openly admit to you, and it's honest. It's sad, but it's honest, where they will admit that they don't have the resources to fight their own departments. And I can think of ministers who actually told that to us when I was an MP. So, and there are times when backbench members of Parliament introduce pieces of legislation as private members' bills. You'd be surprised how few do it, and you'd be surprised how many of them don't really have a clue of what they want to bring in. And then so they'll say, for example, do National Tree Day, rather than something useful and meaningful. And it's kind of sad. But there are guys like Ted White, for example. He cranked out, probably dozens of bills. And when other MPs didn't have a thought in their head as to what bill they wanted to bring forward when their number got picked, they would choose one of Ted's. And so he, at any time, probably had a half dozen or a dozen bills debated before the House, and he knew what he was doing on that. So kudos to him.
All right, because I have an opinion. Maybe you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but in Parliament, when Trudeau stands up and says something really stupid, and then Pierre Poilievre stands up and says something kind of clever, and then Jagmeet Singh stands up and says something, I don't know, communist. Is that just theater? Are there? It just seems like theater to me. Go ahead.
Question period is entirely theater, and what happens is the day before, people try to lobby for questions. Some MPs, they'll literally clear off people's desks. They'll intimidate them. It's ridiculous, actually, how bad people want to get a question on the roster. And as well, you'll have people working in the office of the Leader of the Opposition. They'll be tracking stories, figuring out what they think the media is following, what they think is interesting, what they think is going to get coverage. And then, either late that night or early the next morning, they'll assign MP offices questions. When Ezra Levant was coordinating question period, when I first got elected, because I knew him through my debate time at the University of Calgary, he got me up fairly often as part of the snack pack. And that means my French lessons were gone for the day. I was toast. And so the preparing for question period takes the whole day. So your staffer, Angela, was a good question preparer with me. She was a debater and had that background with her husband as well. We used to debate at intercollegiate business competitions and Western McGowan championships in Western Canada. So she would help draft the question. We would go and practice it in QP practice with Ezra. They would often make changes to it. You go back to the office, probably skipped lunch because you had to do that. Then you go and deliver it in question period. Then you do the media scrums. And by that point, your whole day is shot. So there's a lot of performance.
What does the performance actually do, out of curiosity? Does it solve anything?
Well, the real upside of it is this, that on the government side, on the ministerial side, they have people in, let's say, for example, Alan Rock's office or whichever minister you choose, and they have to research the various issues. They have to figure out what do they think could come up as a question for their minister. So they'll have a big binder, and they might have two binders, who knows, 20 issues, 30 issues, 10 issues, whatever it is that might come up in their portfolio. And what that forces the minister's office to do is to pay attention, to see if they can take issues out of the roster by solving them, to come up with answers, to come up with solutions, etc. And so it forces those various ministers' offices to be attentive to what the questions could potentially be and the solutions and how to remove that as a thorn in the side of the minister or the government, if you will. So it actually does serve a valuable purpose in that sense.
Okay, so Q&As can help, I guess. That's cool. My thoughts are on this Mr. Speaker thing. I know that you have to have a speaker at the head of the table, if you will, to keep everybody level. So instead of me shouting at Trudeau, if I was the leader of, I don't know, the True Freedom Party or something, I can't shout directly at Trudeau. I have to look at the Speaker of the House and insult Trudeau through the Speaker of the House. Now, why is it that you can't address the other party leader over the floor? It's always got to be turn your head.
One, because that person is standing in a sense, as a representative of the majesty of the Queen, King, etc. Another thing is that it can get hot. And I've seen members literally come to fisticuffs sometimes, like Daryl Stinson and Jean Charest, etc. And so the reason you have two sword lengths as the distance between the desks is so they can't fight each other from their respective desks. So it can get hot, and so that's a way of making it so that the debate, the nature of it is all directed through the speaker. So let's put it this way. I've been involved with the 50th anniversary of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association in London, and you see some of the new democracies and some of the ones that have went away from democracy and come back, like Zimbabwe, for example. Mm-hmm. And you realize that how we do it is very important, because there's 50 some countries that are part of the Commonwealth, and our rules and procedures that we've done and developed in Canada, along with Bouchane's, along with Erskine and May and stuff, those rules and procedures that they reference, that stuff's very important, because that is civilization. And I have seen guys who are thugs that, back in their own country would probably put a 9mm bullet in somebody for bringing them water without ice. So to have that civilization, that sense of parliamentary procedure and how it should be done is very important, and is a civilizing influence not only for Canada but for the world.
Well, that's something I have to agree with, is that if you want to say that you're a civilized country, you got to be polite in your parliamentary system, or in your Senate, or wherever else it might be. Now, I'm getting a lot of questions here in email and all over the social media, because we're on like 40 different social media sites tonight. Everyone's asking about this Bill C-63, okay, where Trudeau wants to lock Canadians up for life if you misgender somebody online or say something offensive online. What are the odds of this thing passing? Go ahead.
Well, I think pretty good, because as long as Jagmeet Singh wants to get his pensions, he got elected in a by-election in Burnaby in 2019. He's not pensionable till he's in for 6 years, which is 2025. So he wants to stick around long enough to get a pension. And that's the same thing he did when he was in Queen's Park in Ontario. So there's that. I'm hoping.
Hold on. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, is going to help Trudeau vote in Bill C-63 to lock us up for life so he can get a pension?
Yeah, probably. Sometimes it's that banal. Yeah. And now, one thing that could happen to our benefit, because he is so, kind of self-interested that way, is that if, like, his numbers were quite high in January, and had they stayed high and kept high or increased, then he could have potentially pulled the trigger on a budget vote and we had a spring election, for example. And then as a result, he would leapfrog Trudeau. Pierre Poilievre would become prime minister. Trudeau would drop down to third place. Jagmeet Singh would go from leader of the third party to the official opposition. And therefore his salary would go up, his pension would go up. And even if the NDP was disgruntled with him for whatever reason, because he wears more expensive suits and watches than I have, then they wouldn't come out against him because he was leader of the opposition. And wow, that's as good as Jack Layton ever did. And he would get a big pension and all that type of stuff. And that would have been a beautiful scenario to get rid of Trudeau. But sadly, the numbers for the NDP are softening up. So I don't know. We'll find out, I guess.
All right. So I guess then we blame two people. If Canadians start going to jail for life for misgendering people online because of Bill C-63, it's Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh that we have to blame.
Yeah,
okay. Is there anything that the Senate in Canada can do to stop that from happening?
Well, I'm going to say something, and it's not well known kind of publicly, but when Trudeau was looking to get the Emergencies Act, he had it in the House of Commons because of support from the NDP and the Liberals, but he had trouble in the Senate, and a lot of those senators were appointed by Jean Chrétien. So Jean Chrétien's never going to sing this. He's never going to talk about it. He's never going to ballyhoo. But I'm fairly confident that he told some of the senators that were appointed in his time, don't give him that power. And thank goodness he did that. So they told Trudeau he didn't have the ability to marshal it through the Senate. And so you have to give some of those senators credit that they didn't give him that power.
Okay, so there's a chance this thing won't go through. A chance, small chance, it seems.
Well, you can hope, yeah.
Is there any way that Trudeau can threaten the senators in Ottawa with jail time if they don't vote his way?
The senators are pretty hard to touch because they don't have to come for nomination. They're there till they're 75. The longer they sit in the Senate, like if they get appointed, they're usually gracious and kind of kissing the ring of the person who put them in for the first few years. But after they've been there for a while, especially after the person who appointed them is gone, they kind of operate autonomously, kind of onto themselves. And so they're like herding cats. If you think herding cats in the House of Commons is hard, it's even harder in the Senate. And thank goodness for that, because that's why Trudeau didn't get emergency powers.
Okay, so we should still be concerned about this Bill C-63.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Rob, do you think it's possible if Bill C-63 goes through that it's going to pass the Senate with actual life sentences for misgendering losers? Is that something that can actually happen?
I hope not, but I have seen strange things happen, and I'm hoping that once again some of the Chrétien senators realize that this is a bit over the top. Like, to give Chrétien his credit, he didn't allow same-sex marriage under his time, because he would tell the caucus, "My name is Chrétien," which means Christian in French, and he said, "Not on my watch." And the reason it went through was because Marzolini, the Liberal pollster, told the caucus that, this is under Martin, that if they went ahead with it, they were going to lose a certain amount of votes, percentages to the NDP, but that they were going to gain on the other side of the equation vis-a-vis the Conservatives, etc. So it literally was a 1 point difference in terms of what they would gain with the NDP versus lose to the Conservatives. So I think if memory serves me correctly, they were going to lose, I think it was 3 points or something like that to the Conservatives, and they were going to gain 4 against the NDP. So it was a 1 point advantage, and Martin said, "Okay, sounds good for me," and he went with it. So it was just literally that ridiculous. So we'll see. Time will tell.
Is there anything that the Canadian people can do to lock Trudeau up before he's out of office?
Well, you know what I think the real weakness for him is this whole situation with Wuhan, China, and the jabs. So now, let's say, for example, let's go with what his narrative will be, that he's just too stupid and ignorant to have realized he shouldn't be allowing people with ties to the People's Liberation Army to be in our biohazards lab in Winnipeg. Okay, that's incredibly ignorant and stupid. But let's say he says, I'm just a doofus, I didn't know any better, and people buy it. Okay, that's bad, whatever. But then after that the Chinese were involved in smuggling COVID out of the lab in Winnipeg over to Wuhan to weaponize it, right? Once you know that and you cover it up, and then you want to buy a bunch of jabs off of China so that every man, woman, and child can be jabbed 8 times when you know what China was up to and their intentions, that's treasonous. Like, you can say the first action was just ignorance and stupidity, which I'm sure he will plead. But when it comes to after and you take great lengths to cover it up and buy all these jabs off of them with their evil intent, that's treasonous. I don't know how you get around and skate around that being treasonous.
Do you think that Pierre Poilievre, should he win this election, has the balls to actually have Trudeau arrested, like your shirt says, and lock him up?
I know sometimes young officers in the RCMP see the law the way it is and say, okay, it's pretty clear cut, we should go ahead and do this. Jason Kenney faced that. Their young RCMP officers realized that over the kamikaze candidate stuff, it's like, oh, this is pretty clear. But the older guys, the older hands, don't want to bite the hands that feed them, right? They know who signs the checks and who authorizes the contracts for them, whatnot. So they were a little more hesitant. I guess we're going to find out.
Let's certainly hope so. I guess the good news is Justin Trudeau, tried to buy land here in Costa Rica, succeeded in buying a house. Now, it's somewhere on the east side of the country. I don't know where it is yet. It won't be long to figure that out, because I'm sure he'll talk. But El Presidente here would not let him bring his stolen money into the country. Yeah, everybody moves their money here into Costa Rica because nobody can touch it. There's no extradition treaties with Western countries, and there's no bank info sharing treaties at all. So Trudeau thought he was going to bring a couple of $100 million here. El Presidente said no. So Trudeau says, okay, fine. We're going to shut down all the consulates. So there are no Costa Rican consulates open in Canada right now because Trudeau couldn't move his money here. Where is Justin Trudeau going to go after he's no longer prime minister? Where do you think he can go?
Well, ultimately hell, But before then, you know, that's the great debate. Yeah, no, I mean, he deserves his comeuppance. I mean, no conservative leader or MP for that matter would have survived and skated through blackface. And I mean, there was a video that was shared with me maybe a week or two ago that claimed to be Ella Grace Trudeau, a teenager now, in a what seemed to be inebriated state, claiming that her father, Justin, was going to steal people's money, which is what we're going to be talking about.
Yes.
And I checked the age lined up. I looked at the physiology, and I'm like, well, that could be her. Yeah, that's possible. And everybody was recording it on their cell phones because it was such an amazing moment to have transpire. And I shared it around, and he's up to a lot of bad stuff. He's drank a lot of the Kool-Aid from the World Economic Forum. He's the darling and the poster child of Klaus Schwab. There's a lot of stuff that guy has to answer for.
Yeah, I guess we're going to move on to banking in just a minute here, but this is kind of on a personal note for me. You and I had a conversation back in 2021 about Trudeau's trip to the Aga Khan's Island. Can you elaborate? Like it was hilarious. What you told me, I had to bite my lips and not laugh out loud because it really was good. Please tell us what happened. Tell us why Sophie didn't like her husband back then.
Well, from what I've heard, and I wasn't on the Aga Khan's Island. I've never been to the Aga Khan's Island, but so in other words, what I heard was that the family, as in Sophie Trudeau and Justin and the kids, went down to the Caribbean.
Right.
And then Trudeau, Justin, decided that he wanted to break away from the family, and he was with his little bestie friend there, Seamus O'Regan, who was at that time dating some guy, but is now married to same guy, and some other liberal male functionaries in the party, etc., left where Sophie and the kids were and went to the Aga Khan's Island. And it was a big boy fest without the wife, without the kids. And they were worried, from what I've been told, that this story would get out. So it was easier to just say that he was there visiting the Aga Khan and give a big donation to the Aga Khan Foundation and, you know, suck up and swallow whatever it was with regard to conflict of interest on that, than to admit to the deeper story about him getting away from his wife and kids with a bunch of these liberal LGBTs.
To recap what you've said, and I'll summarize it my style. Justin Trudeau, this would have been 2019, was it? Earlier.
I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, it's a bit earlier than that, I think. So he goes on a vacation with his family, wife and kids, and leaves them to go sleep with men on the Aga Khan's Island, and kind of got caught because obviously people like yourself in Parliament knew about it. Now, when we had all found out about this, I got to ask, why did the CBC or CNN or Fox News not break that story? I mean, announcement, Justin Trudeau leaves kids on beach to go sleep with men. That's a hell of a story. That would have ruined him back then, maybe.
Well, you know, sometimes there's a lot of the purple mafia, they call it, that is in the media. And certainly the CBC has a whole bunch of those types. I know I've been hounded with questions by some of those characters over the years, type of thing, with an agenda to push that transgender stuff. So that's a real thing, you know. And when you look at the Parliamentary Press Gallery, for example, on a Wednesday afternoon in Ottawa, there's a whole bunch of those characters up there. So that's an issue, you know. And say, for example, if any prime minister wants to go ahead and cut funding to the CBC, if they have any skeletons in their closet, and there are many prime ministers who have skeletons in their closet, then they have to worry about whether or not their LGBTs working in the PMO are going to compromise them their boss, or their LGBT friends that they hang out with in the CBC are going to compromise the boss, or whatever. So it's sad and it's complicated, and
Wow.
yeah, it's a mess.
And I don't really want to come out here and be really childish about the whole thing, but it is ridiculous that you've got a prime minister who's going to risk everything, his career, his family, relationships with his wife, his kids, the whole bit, to go bang a guy on a different island. Like, just the asininity of leaving your family behind on another island to go and be a fool, and then have to cover up. I mean, how many tax dollars go into a cover up like that? Just like a rough estimate. Any idea? Hey, Eddie?
Well, it's got to be, it's in the significant millions. But I also heard that the We Charity scandal stuff, which was within the billions, not millions anymore, in the billions, that what that was him wanting to pay off his wife to keep her quiet. And so a good chunk of that money was going to be directed toward that, because they built her, the estimates vary between an $8.4 and an $8.6 million mansion in Harrington Lake, aside from the residence that was already there, because she didn't want to be with Justin, or didn't want the kids to be with him. And so, that's another serious chunk of change. We're talking in the tens of millions just for that thing. But that a significant chunk of the We Charity billions was going to go to his hush money type of thing. And, like I said, that's huge amounts of money we're talking.
Oh boy, that is a lot of money. Ed, any questions before we move on to the real topic of the night? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to fly through this. So, hi, Rob. First of all,
hey.
Thanks for coming on the show. Do you actually, as far as I'm concerned, most politicians are puppets. I see no, like, I've spoken to, what was that MP there, Kevin, that you had in your area, Mississauga?
Ikra Khalid?
Yeah, she's about as smart as a bad block of wood. She has no idea what the deficit was.
Ed, we have people from all over the world watching, so I have to explain who that is. Ikra Khalid is, at the time when she first got her job in the Liberal Party, was about 29 years of age. She had to ask her daddy, because she lived with her daddy, Daddy, I would like to run for political office under Justin Trudeau because I am a left-wing libtard maniac who wants to destroy Canada. Can I do so and not have to wear a hijab? She had to ask her daddy for permission to not wear a hijab so she could run for political office. And her first act after getting her job was to table Motion M103, which was to quell, which essentially means kill you, if you read the word quell properly, anyone who's Islamophobic without a definition on what Islamophobia is. And then I called her an idiot and a moron, and she read my quote in Parliament to the whole country. I was proud of that. And then a couple of weeks later, I was charged with hate speech. Yeah, and that's still in the courts today, Rob, 7 years later. So that's still in the court. My next court appearance is in 2 weeks.
It's called lawfare, my friend.
That's all it is. It has nothing to do with justice. They couldn't care less. All right.
And okay, next thing. Do you actually believe that the elections are not rigged?
Oh, I think we have serious problems with election integrity. I wrote a memo with probably 12 points on it for Danielle Smith. We have to get rid of electronic tabulators. We have to minimize as much as possible mail-in ballots, advanced polls, statutory declarations. Like with a statutory declaration, you can walk into a polling place, say, oh, I can't find my wallet. I forgot my wallet. And they go, oh, that's okay. Can you just sign the statutory declaration to say that you're such and such? What's your name? Oh, it's Elmer Fudd. Oh, okay, Elmer. Well, do you have anybody who can vouch for you? Oh, yeah, the guy who drove the bus with, Daisy Duck and Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse. Yeah, he's the one who drove the bus for us all. He can vouch for me. Oh, great. Okay, fine. And then set individual vouchers for everybody. And then you drive on to the next polling location and do the same. And I'm not making this up. This was actually used in Calgary Center. In my riding of Calgary West, we would have usually, I went through 6 general elections, maybe just over 100 ballots that were cast by statutory declaration. Didn't affect the outcome. But in Eric Lowther's riding in Calgary Center, they had over 10,000 ballots cast by statutory declaration. And Eric got more votes in his second election than he got in his first, but he still lost. And it's because of those 10,000 ballots by statutory declaration. So what I'm saying is, there are people who can still cheat by paper ballot. Okay, Lyndon Johnson cheated to get into the Senate by paper ballot. Lyndon Johnson cheated, or not, I should say, John F. Kennedy cheated in Chicago with Richard Daley in 1960 to win over Richard Nixon. Okay, so it can happen. It's just a lot harder. And all this other stuff that weakens the chain of custody of a ballot where you can vote outside your right. No, get rid of it all. Just get rid of all that. Just make it so simple. And because otherwise, as soon as you go electronic and tabulation and all this type of stuff, the mechanisms for cheating are there. And you can talk to intelligence officers, from Venezuela and other countries where this stuff was brought in. Every time, every election, the cheat just got more sophisticated. Get rid of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to point this out, Ed, for everybody, is for those watching on TikTok, obviously you can't see this, but when I ran for Calgary mayor, first off, I want to say thank you very much for having me over to your place and showing me the history of presentation. I went out and I got a beautiful blue suit after you had illustrated that every politician who's ever won was wearing a blue suit. You even were talking about the color of tie to use, right? So thank you for that, Rob. But the Canadian media put me on the front page of every newspaper in the country. And I had 11 rallies just like this one here, over 5,000 people, maybe more. They were crazy big. Now, Rob, with all the press that I got, do you think, as a former member of parliament, that I only got 1,700 votes in that election?
Well, I'll tell you, when Nenshi was up against Bill Smith, for example, okay, what they did is Nenshi proudly proclaimed that Calgary was going to have 100,000 extra ballots, okay, just to make sure they didn't run out of paper ballots. Okay. And then magically, they ran out of paper ballots. And where did they run out of paper ballots? Where were they short? In Southeast and Southwest Calgary, which are 75% conservative, for the federal party, okay, where Bill Smith was polling strongly. And where do they have a ton of ballots? Well, in Center and Northeast, where Nenshi and the Liberals do well, right? I just got to explain that, Rob. So in the Northeast, by the airport in the city of Calgary in Alberta, Canada, that's where the airport is, and that's where the Muslims and the LGBTs live. And in the Southeast, it's very conservative. That's areas like Cranston, Seaton, Arbor Lake, and so on. Yeah, it's all white families with money. Like that's what those areas are. So the seats that have gone Liberal in the past in Calgary are Calgary Skyview and Calgary Center, right? And that's Calgary Center and Calgary Northeast, right? Okay. And so Nenshi there was a surplus of ballots up there, no waiting in line, easy peasy, go and vote. But if you were going in Southwest and Southeast Calgary, there were lineups. Oh, you might want to come back in 3 or 4 hours. We have a shortage of ballots, blah, 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 all this type of stuff, right? And then on election night, the machine crashed for 3 hours, right? Edmonton was counted in 45 minutes. No problem there. Mm-hmm. But the machines in Calgary crashed for 3 hours from 8 p.m. until 11 p.m. And then after all the soccer moms have gone home, they were serving as the scrutineers. Remember, when the machines crash like that, there's nothing posted publicly, so you can't check what some soccer mom got as a result in scrutineering versus what the public record is, because the public record's not posted. The machines crashed. So you can't even check and verify. And then at 11 p.m. when everybody's going to bed, they're like, oh, Nenshi won, right? So we've had a problem for a while with regard to this type of stuff. And I'm just saying, get rid of this stuff. Go back to paper ballots. And like when we watched the Trump situation vis-a Biden in the last campaign, you don't stop an election in the middle of the night and then say, oh, we're going to resume in the morning, right? And then when you have this situation where you saw literally votes would transfer from one column to the other, it wasn't even that they stopped in one column entirely and the other one kept going. No, that's bad enough. That implies cheating. But you literally saw votes transfer from one column to the next. Come on, folks.
Got it. Ed, go ahead. Question, because we're moving on.
I'm trying to do this quick, Kevin. Where is Gerald Butts? And just to remind you, Gerald Butts is a prodigy of a gentleman, I don't know if he's a gentleman, a commie called Maurice Strong, who also got Papa Senior elected back in the 60s. Where is Gerald? And what kind of evil is he up to?
Great question. But him and Trudeau are obviously buddies. And he's one of these eco guys. For example, Maurice Strong was wanting to create this huge swath of territory, basically going from Canada down to Mexico, that was anathema to any form of business, etc. And he spent a lot of time at the United Nations. I think more and more of us are skeptical about the UN and some of the agendas that come out of there, the World Health Organization, etc., etc. So I don't know where he is exactly, but he certainly was the brainchild for Trudeau's first election bid.
Okay, so I just want to also say this to everyone who's watching on TikTok, Rumble, Facebook, DLive, Twitch, Kick, Restream. There's so many out there. I want everyone to remember freedomreport.ca. All right, I'm going to put the logo in the top there. It's freedomreport.ca. This is the Kevin J. Johnston Show, which is every Tuesday and Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. When in doubt of where this is broadcast, just tell everybody, freedomreport.ca. It'll bring them to my Rumble channel, where I've archived the better part of 1,800 videos, and there's more in other places, okay? So freedomreport.ca brings you to Rumble, which is a very stable broadcasting platform. We're moving on to banking now, everybody. Rob, banking. We're going to talk, though, Ed, we're done. We're moving on to banking. We got to get through this. We have 25 slides to go through. What is it? What? This better be good.
I got to ask. Has anyone in Ottawa, specifically in the federal parliament building, ever heard of a document called the Canadian Constitution? And have they ever seen it? Have they ever read it? Do they have even a quarter of the brain power required to even somewhat take a grasp of what it may be or what it applies to?
Well, I studied it as the British North America Act in political science in university. But I'll tell you this, though. Most of the MPs don't actually read the bills. That's the God's honest truth. What happens is the only time you'll do a thorough read through of a bill is usually if it's in the clause by clause in committee, the committee that the bill is assigned to between second and third reading. That's usually the only detailed reading that a bill gets. That's the honest truth.
So you're saying they're taking money and not doing their job?
I think during COVID, it was really ridiculous. Like, at least when I was an MP, you did like 100 flights a year back and forth, and you had to show up for committee. Post-COVID, I mean, it was ridiculous. Like, you could sit at home and do committees, via, what is it, FaceTime or Zoom or whatever they had set up for the parliamentary stuff. I mean, it got lax, and they didn't have to come to Ottawa because they had to keep space and distances and contamination or whatever, it got really light.
Okay, so you've heard of the Constitution. Okay, that leaves 337. Have they ever heard of the Canadian Constitution or the North America Act?
I'll be honest, I don't think most of them have read through the entire thing or the bills that they vote on. Like, that's just the honest truth. It's only if they do clause by clause in committee where they read through every aspect of a bill they're voting on. That's the truth.
Yeah. All right, everyone.
So basically, they ignore it.
Ed, we got to go on to banking. Yeah. Okay. Last question, Ed. Last one.
So, no, that's pretty much it. So basically, they're ignoring our Constitution. So it's okay for us to sue them for not doing their job?
Well, you're welcome to sue them, but I think what you would find is that the Board of Internal Economy and the Parliament would pick up the bill. So you're in a sense, you're suing yourself, because as long as whatever you're suing them for is in the aspect of them being a senator or a member of Parliament or a minister of the Crown or whatever, it's the taxpayer that's picking up the tab. So you can do that, but ultimately you're paying the bill.
Even if we sue them personally and severally.
Well, if you sue them personally, it better be something personal as opposed to something related to their job, because if it's related to the job, it'll be picked up by the Board of Internal Economy. So
you can't win either way. Got it. Okay.
There's got to be a way to get these bastards for being the creeps they are.
Well, it's called political organization.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Sorry, I just had to get in there. And...
Okay, yeah. Okay. No, Ed, we love you, man. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, no problem. That's Ed Jamnisek. Ed, leave the buttons alone. I got it. Ed Jamnisek, everybody, who's been my co-host for quite a few years. Ed's a curious kind of guy. But we do have to talk about banking. So for those who do not know who I'm talking to, this is Rob Anders, who's a former member of Parliament. And unfortunately for Rob, he's been within 10 feet of Justin Trudeau. And how are his cooties? Did his cooties make you sick? Because when he talks, he makes me sick.
Well, I remember when I would watch him give speeches when he first got into the House, and I thought, there's no way they're going to elect this guy. I mean, he has a lisp and he's effeminate. Like, is that really going to work? And it did. I was shocked.
Boy, oh boy. Let's talk about money, banking. We have a problem. The Bank Act. Could you tell us what that is? And let's move into everything that people need to know about this. Go ahead.
Sure. So we've had a Bank Act in Canada since 1871 for over 150 years. And over time, it's usually had situations where every 10 years or so, it goes through a regulatory review because, things change about banking and they tweak it, whatever. But Mr. Justin Trudeau, special Justin Trudeau, has put in an expiry date of June 30th, 2025, 15 months from now, which means that unless it's amended in 15 months, all the major federally chartered banks will lose their mandates, will lose their charters. And yeah. And I want to kind of, if we can do the PowerPoint, I'll explain how that all interrelates into central bank digital currency. So central bank digital currency is all about control, my friends. And it turns out that it's just a modern tweak of communist theory with digital appliances. So let's go back in history to talk about, I guess, in a sense, what money is.
Sure thing. And the face there on the far left is Karl Marx. For some reason, Antifa idiots love this guy. Karl Marx wrote that ridiculous book, the Communist Manifesto, where he was essentially saying, hey, don't work. Yeah, let the state pay for everything for you, but don't work. Where's the money coming from? He was an alcoholic and a wife beater, never had a job, never held political office. He had a friend that funded all of his stupid ideas. And when the British sent out spies to go and meet this guy, they reported that his house was so dirty they refused to sit on his furniture for fear of ruining their trousers. Yeah, I read that stuff. This guy was a maniac, and for some reason, Antifa loves this idiot. So let's move on to our first slide here. Gold. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, obviously gold, been around for thousands of years, and we see the Lion of Lydia. We see the early Ying Yuan of China. We've got the gold Darius of Persia, and these go back, before the year zero. By 610 BC, 600 BC, 520 BC. So for thousands of years, gold has been recognized as a form of currency because it's so malleable, because it is so conductive, because it makes for great jewelry, et cetera, et cetera. It's used in semiconductors and whatever today. It's for a long test of time been a form of currency.
One thing I did want to say is Silver Gold Bull. It's a massive gold and silver dealer and platinum and palladium dealer in Calgary. And it was explained to me by them that gold, the reason it's so valuable and took over from platinum back in 2000, and I think it's 2008, gold surpassed platinum because there's 5,000 years of record keeping on gold. That a piece of gold would get you a month worth of provisions compared to silver that got you a day's worth. But gold and silver still have 5,000 years of accounting behind them to back that up. So I guess platinum and palladium, we'll see. There's about 30 to 50 years of record keeping on that, maybe.
And okay. Some people would also say that gold and silver are God's money, right? Because it's scriptural, it's biblical.
Then that also counts because platinum wasn't there. All right. Silver, go ahead.
Yeah. So once again, silver goes back about as far as gold does, maybe misses the mark by a few decades, but you have the turtle from Greece, the Karshapana of India, you've got Ionia, you've got the drachma of Greece, the denarius of Rome, so gold and silver go back a long ways. And I would argue that the Pax Romana, like people talk about the euro today, what made sense as far as a European broad-based currency was what happened with ancient Rome, where they had a gold, silver, and copper coin, and that was workable for 800 years of the Pax Romana. But yeah, obviously silver has a great history too.
Okay. There's copper. These are a couple of copper coins.
That's right. So, we got rid of the pennies because we decided that it was too expensive. But, in Canada. Anyhow, I fought that decision, but I lost. Anyhow, but here we have copper, right? So they had copper spades in China and the assis of Rome. So once again, it just shows you that the Romans had all three of these. And there was issues, like, for example, about the shaving of coins, right? So in ancient Rome, the worry was that people would shave coins to diminish the value or take a little bit of the silver, gold, copper out. Well, that's the reason a lot of coins today, and it's been done in mimic of this, they have that edging, that serrating around the edge, so you can tell whether or not a coin has been shaved. That's the reason those were stuck into coins.
Yeah, I heard about that. That's what actually started devaluing Roman currency, where people would just shave a little bit off the edge of every coin that they came across, and smelt that down and make their own bars. It's bizarre.
That's
Apparently, Canada, I don't know what year we stopped using silver in our coins, but the Americans were just stealing our coins and melting them down too.
Right.
So
yeah, I think it was 68. And that coincides with Trudeau.
No,
right?
yeah, Trudeau Senior, right? Definitely.
That's right.
The communist. Yeah. All right, so free banking. What's this?
Yeah, so I want to talk about this. This was a beautiful period in Canadian history. We should be very proud of this because we had the longest lasting free banking period in the world from 1817 to 1914. So in 1914, a lot of governments around the world wanted to pay for the war, the First World War, and so they printed currency like it was going out of style. They delinked themselves from gold and silver in order just to be able to pay for the rack up the debts. But
Right.
From 1817 to 1914, what free banking was we had over a dozen, maybe as many as 20 banks in Canada that, as long as they had enough gold and silver, they were able to issue their own currency. So we didn't require a central bank at this time, right? I mean, yeah, you can, like, the central bank can set rules. They can say, for example, that you have to have 3% of your assets,
Right.
that are held in gold or something like that. But it was a much more libertarian, much more reciprocal relationship that was controlled by the private banks themselves. And so, our currency at that time was tradable and equally accepted in the UK and in the Caribbean, because we had this interesting triangle trade relationship where, there'd be rum in the Caribbean and there'd be fish in Newfoundland, and in the east coast of Canada and Halifax, and then refined products like linens, etc., in the UK. But yeah, our currency was the best it's ever been at that time.
Yeah, and I'm looking at some of these things here. You've got in the top right corner the Bank of Nova Scotia. So one province had its own bank and its own money. Looking down there, you've got the Merchants Bank of Halifax. So a city could issue its own money. That's pretty cool. What else do we have there? International Bank. You got the Exchange Bank. So there's a lot of, it seems to me that there were a lot of private banks in Canada that were able to produce just enough currency to keep money flowing.
It was a beautiful system. And when you see how badly compromised where we're at today, and where it could potentially get worse with central bank digital currency, you'll realize that this period from 1817 to 1914 was absolutely magical. And it was the longest lasting free banking system in the history of the world that I know of, in terms of a reserve, gold or silver, for the notes that were circulating. It was a beautiful thing. It didn't require much at all of a central bank. It really was a beautiful system.
Yeah. So I'll just point out two more things here. So the Bank of Upper Canada, that's modern day Ontario. So that had its own bank. On the far right side, you've got the Bank of Montreal. So a city, or I guess a colony at the time, had its own money. Phenomenal. Next slide there, we get the same thing, I guess, here, right? More currencies.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to show that was I wanted people to understand how prolific this was. In other words, we had dozens of banks that were issuing this currency based on what they held in either gold or silver. It was a magical time. It wasn't issued by a central government. It was done by the private banks themselves. They all complied with regard to what they had to have as a reserve in either gold or silver. And the banknotes could be issued in Canadian dollars or pounds, and could be exchanged in, Jamaica, the Bahamas, obviously Canada, Newfoundland, Great Britain. it was a beautiful time, and you'll see how badly compromised things have come since then.
Yeah, next slide. So go ahead with this one.
All right, so this Karl Marx fella, along with this Frederick Engels, writes this book in 1845 called The Holy Family. Now, he was known for a number of other things like Das Kapital, the Communist Manifesto, etc. But in this one, he lays out basically how he wants to abolish money. And he didn't get to actually do it because he was just this kind of philosopher who hated his father, didn't like that his dad was an industrialist, and was kind of growing up as a rebel in rebellion to his father. But we'll see next where this comes to when Lenin seizes power in the Soviet Union.
And, oops, hold on there. Kaboom, there we are. Go ahead.
All right, so obviously Russia enters World War I, as does Germany, as does Canada, a whole bunch of other countries, Turkey, etc., whatever. And they obviously end redeeming a currency because everybody wants to be able to pay for all this stuff. So then what happens is they have the October Revolution. Within a month, in November 20th exactly of 1917, they had 12 banks holding 80% of the capital. And I just want to point out that Russia had more banks than Canada does. Like when you look at the major federally chartered banks in Canada, it's easier to nationalize the banks in Canada today than it was in Russia in 1917. So weigh that and keep that in mind in terms of everything we're going to go through here. But they started to restrict, people's withdrawals, which is what happens often when you have a run on currency, etc.
Right.
So then in 1918, they go ahead and they start, raising taxes. They basically nationalize a bunch of industries. And so even people who own their own business where it's just them as an employee, those become nationalized. Just think how ridiculous that is when you nationalize a business where it's just one employee. But that happened. And so you had this situation where £1 in 1918 was worth 45 rubles. And the inflation rates are ridiculous, right? 598% in 1 year, 1,376%, et cetera, et cetera. And it gets so bad that eventually you have one of these pound sterlings is the equivalent of over 5 billion rubles. And I want to point this out as well. In 1921, Lenin introduces the new economic policy, the NEP. I don't think it's just a coincidence that the national energy policy by Pierre Trudeau has the same name. I mean, his father was very much enamored with communism. So the Americans, try to save the Russians. Originally, they were actually pro-revolution because it was getting rid of a monarchy and they were pro-democracy. But Herbert Hoover realizes that this is terribly wrong. Writes back reports of Trotsky, murdering, teachers and nuns and priests by the tens of thousands. They send over 237 ships. They set up 21,000 kitchens. They send over 768 million tons of flour, grain, rice, beans, pork, milk, sugar. They employ 125,000 Russians to help with the loading, hauling, weighing, cooking, serving of the food. But the Soviets, despite all of that help, they're worried that literally the socialist experiment will disappear from the face of the earth because they have up to 10 million people starving to death. And so they begin to relent on this Marxist idea that Lenin is trying to carry forward to actually eliminate money.
So you're talking about the Russian Empire was considering getting rid of money based on the whimsical garbage that came out of the mouth of Karl Marx. Is that essentially it?
Well, when Lenin took over in 1917, they literally did try to eliminate money, but it wound up that 10 million Russians were starving to death within 4 years of their attempt to do that. And when 1 out of 13 people is starving to death, they worried that the socialist experiment in the Soviet Union would fade from the face of the earth. So they got so desperate that they actually, by 1921, began to mint, and nobody trusted them because the Russians were so destitute. Nobody trusted them to mint their own silver coins. They had the British do it because the British were trusted with the pound sterling. Everybody thought the Russians would put out tin or zinc or something like that. So they had to get the British
right.
to mint their coins because nobody trusted them.
Just a quick question here is, what exactly did Lenin think that he could replace money with? Was it
units of labor? They thought that if they printed up enough currency, and they literally had their printing presses running day and night, and he talks about that. He gives quotes about that, how they were going to destroy the value of money by using a combination of inflation and taxation. Okay. And so that the average Russian peasant would think that 100 ruble note was absolutely worthless and wasn't worth the rags that it was used to print on. And they thought that by doing that, the only thing that would matter at that point when that was done was to destroy money and destroy capitalism, was that the capitalists wouldn't have any money anymore. And the only thing that would matter is a unit of labor. So a plumber would have, an hour of his labor, and a brick, layer would have his unit of labor, and a farm laborer would have his unit of labor, etc. And that therefore everybody would just have units of labor. But it wound up starving people to death is what it did.
That's still money because someone has to keep a ledger.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And it's more complicated.
Yeah, way more complicated. Okay, let's bump to our next slide here. And there he is. He's still in the Kremlin, is he not, this guy? That's Vladimir Lenin? Yeah,
they still have his body embalmed. And Lenin said the way to crush the bourgeoisie is to grind them between the millstones of taxation and inflation. And let's face it, folks, Mr. Trudeau is plenty familiar with taxation and inflation, and you have to worry about where he's taking stuff.
Well, Justin Trudeau is doing today exactly what Lenin did in the Soviet Union. Actually, it was Russia back then, but yeah, I mean, that's exactly what's going on.
They're carrying out this plan, folks. It's just that rather than using the ruble notes of the 1920s, they're trying to transition to this digital currency, and I'll explain how dangerous that is.
Yeah, we're going to get to digital currency throughout the slideshow here. Yes, Ed, you got something?
They also did this in the Spanish War, did they not? Around the same time.
Well, a lot of countries, when they go into a war scenario, they pull out of something that's pegged to gold or to silver or anything else that's real, copper, oil, whatever, and they just start printing money. And what's worse about central bank digital currency is you don't even have to run printing machines. You just press a button. You don't even need to print paper. It's worse. It's actually just the press of a button. It's electronic. It's faster. It's more inflationary. It causes higher interest rates. It's worse.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide. What happened? There we go. Go ahead. Hundreds of thousands of ruble notes are being issued daily by our treasury. Go ahead.
Yeah. This is a quote from Lenin. This is done not in order to fill the coffers of the state with practically worthless paper, but with the deliberate intention of destroying the value of money as a means of payment. There is no justification for the existence of money in the Bolshevik state, where the necessities of life shall be paid for by work alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does any of this sound familiar, Canada? Does this maybe sound like something that jihadi Justin Trudeau is doing right now? Rhetorical question, but not really. Okay. Next slide.
Experience has taught us, this is Lenin yet again, experience has taught us it is impossible to root out the evils of capitalism by merely confiscation and expropriation. For however ruthlessly such measures may be applied, astute speculators and obstinate survivors of capitalist classes will always manage to evade them and continue to corrupt the life of the community. The simplest way to exterminate the very spirit of capitalism is therefore to flood the country with notes of high face value without financial guarantees of any sort.
Okay. That's also a problem. It sounds like what's being done right now. Trudeau prints and gives away, what was it now? $2 trillion so far. How could a population of about 41 million, maybe 41 million, ever pay that back when Trudeau not only printed all that money, gave it away, but then shut down the plastics industry and the forestry industry,
oil industry.
oil. Like oil, I think we're about
Oil
5% of our production of oil right now. Plus, on top of that, he's essentially giving the Chinese our fresh water. They're towing our fresh water across the Pacific Ocean behind ships with these massive bladder bags. You know, the ones that you jump on and someone goes flying up in the air, except they're longer than the actual ships that are towing them. That's our fresh water, and he's essentially just giving it away. Wow.
Yeah, I remember when I first got elected, the debt at that time was around 650 billion. And I thought to myself, as a young member of parliament at the time, I thought, I wonder if in my lifetime it'll cross $1 trillion. Justin Trudeau's added easily $1 trillion just by himself.
As far as I remember, the previous Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, it took him the better part of what was it, 2 terms or 3, that to have $10 billion in a surplus, which Justin Trudeau rifled through in less than 2 months. And what the hell did he buy? Because with this $2 trillion of debt that we're talking about here, Rob, there's no new highways, there's no new airports, there's no new waterways, there's no new wind farms that are government funded. There's nothing to show for any of that money, not even a space program. And you want to talk about how stupid we are as a country. We're not even spending money on our own culture. Our satellite is Alouette 1 and Alouette 2. Those things are in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. at Dulles International Airport. I know, I saw them. We don't even have our own satellite, the first one we put up in space, in our own museums. So no wonder the Americans were always number one in the world. They know how to market themselves. At least they had that. We have none of that.
It's a very, very sad situation, and it could get a lot sadder yet.
I think it's going to get a lot sadder soon, but let's keep going on these slides. Go ahead.
And so Lenin continued on to say, already even 100 ruble note is almost valueless in Russia. Soon even the simplest peasant will realize that it is only a scrap of paper, not worth more than the rags from which it is manufactured. Men will cease to covet and hoard it as soon as they discover it will not buy anything, and the great illusion of the value and power of money on which the capitalist state is based will have been definitively destroyed.
And again, he was going to replace it with units of labor, and nobody was around to keep the ledgers. So if you are a plumber and you plumb for an hour, it's worth something.
Yeah.
But to whom?
Right. And here's something to think about in relation to this quote as we go on.
Yeah.
Canada is one of only 12 countries that has no gold bullion reserve. The only gold Canada has is either the stuff that's in the ground that hasn't been mined out yet, or the stuff that's in the mint in Winnipeg or in Ottawa to mint coins. We have no gold bullion reserve. The Americans stopped selling off their stuff, and they have 8,000 tons of it. The Germans have 2,000 tons. The Chinese supposedly have 3,000 tons. The Russians have 2,000 tons. Canada has no gold bullion reserve. So when the stuff hits the fan, that currency that we've got, that plastic that we've got, will have nothing to back it.
Yeah. Who got our gold?
Well, they sold it off and spent it. That's what happened.
I'm dumbfounded. I can't even ask a follow-up question to that statement because it is that stupid. My God.
It is.
Next slide. What happened here?
Yeah. So, this is just showing people, proving that, he wanted unlimited spending authority, right, when COVID hit. And I'm going to give credit to Scott Reid, one of my former colleagues in the House of Commons. He almost single-handedly made sure that Trudeau did not get unanimous consent, to spend as much money as he wanted at the beginning of the COVID situation. Okay, and there you can see where he's talking about raising the debt ceiling, 1.4 trillion, etc. So I'm showing people that he literally has blown $1 trillion. And if he gets central bank digital currency, he won't even have to print the stuff. He'll be able to do it with a press of a button to create even more currency for higher interest rates, higher inflation than we have now.
Yeah, and he'll turn the Canadian mint into low-income housing for all these maniacs being brought into the country. Yeah, that's exactly what he'll do. I can't imagine anything different being done. My God. Oh, okay, Rob, next slide.
So just to show you what the results of that were in the Soviet Union, In 1921, the official estimates, their own admission, okay, said that 5 million people starved to death. The unofficial estimates are easily 10 million, which is, out of a population of 130, it's 1 out of 13 people. Now, Zaporizhia is an area that's now in Ukraine. It's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. The problem right now is that the dams have been blown. It doesn't have enough water. There's a risk of it, for example, overheating of the reactor breaking down, as another Chernobyl, but with even bigger consequences. But this here is a picture of a boy in Zaporizhia who was found guilty of killing his 3-year-old sibling. Okay. And there were many butcher shops, dozens of butcher shops that were charged for selling human flesh. This is when you get rid of money, okay, and you get rid of any medium of exchange, and you literally what winds up happening, this is 4 years in, folks, the starvation is so severe that you have this type of situation happening where this child, this little boy, is eating his own 3-year-old sibling. This really happened.
Rob, I was talking about cannibalism taking place in Venezuela when I was running for mayor of Mississauga. And I got a phone call from an unusual group. There's about 60 people on the line listening to me talking about the fact that Venezuela had put all of its plan into oil and was subsidizing food and rent to its citizens because oil was doing well, to the tune of almost 80%. And then when oil dropped, all the subsidies went. So food obviously went up in price between 5 and 20 times. People ran out of money, ran out of food, ate their pets. Then they went hunting, couldn't find anything else. Then they went to the zoos and they were hunting zoo animals. Then eventually there was cannibalism. Now, when I brought all of this up, I've got all these people in the room. Oh, no, you're lying. We're not voting for you. That would never happen. No, everything's fine. And that's the problem here in the Western world, is that we haven't read our history books. We're not talking to people like you. That's for sure. And we're not paying attention to what human beings really are. Now, I'm going to bring this picture back up. That kid, he's starving. Look at him. You can see his ribs. You can see his trachea through his skin. You can see everything. And the possessed look on his face. He's not proud of having eaten his brother at all.
Yeah, one of the sayings they had about that situation was that first the people who wouldn't lie starved, because when the commissars came around to collect the grain, they told them where the grain was, even for the planting of the next season, and that got taken. And then the next people to starve were the ones who wouldn't steal, because they wouldn't steal grain or food or meat or something from the neighbors. And then the last people to starve were the ones who wouldn't eat others. And that's what was left alive in some of those places after. You can read this stuff, by the way, chapter 5 in the book called, is it called The Bloodlands? The Battle of Europe between Hitler and Stalin. And it goes through, because the Soviet archives were opened under Yeltsin. And you could read all the KGB directives and everything else. It's horrifying to read chapter 5 of that book. I've read that at some Holodomor ceremonies, and it gives you chapter and verse of exactly what happened to starve those people to death.
Deliberate. Obviously, that's deliberate. And I'm just trying to maybe get you to explain to me, if you can, the thought processes of a leader like Lenin starving out his people, the thought processes of Justin Trudeau now starving out his people. Have a look at downtown Calgary, downtown Edmonton, downtown Vancouver, downtown Toronto. The homelessness is out of control. Everybody's hooked on fentanyl, and now the government is giving fentanyl to all of them. And for those who don't know, the Canadian government has locked me up, like I said, for 7 months of my life. You know what they were doing to pacify the prisoners? They weren't giving us airtime outside. They weren't giving us gym equipment to work out on. What they were doing was drugging everybody up with fentanyl and powdered cocaine pressed into a pill. There's a sleep agent. If you crush it down and snort it, it gives you a high. And there is also heroin. They were actually giving the prisoners this stuff in the remand centers in Ontario, in Regina, and in Calgary. Absolutely. pills.
And I will verify and corroborate that, because I know that some of my friends, I have many friends who've done jail time as a result of COVID. Art Pulowski being 51 days in, he will tell you and he will corroborate those stories. That is exactly true.
I was sickened by it. I couldn't believe it. I mean, Ontario, the province of Ontario, where Toronto is, everyone, the amount of pills they were giving out was mind numbing. So they must have had a stash somewhere in that building, because what they had in Maplehurst prison, as far as I could tell, there were 12, they call them ranges, where you're held pre-trial, which I still think should be illegal, but you're held there. There's between 32 and 52 guys per range, and they all got drugs, all of them. Then there was the area for people that got sentenced after a court hearing. There was over 500 that I knew of, and they were all getting drugs. But if you were caught with weed, like just marijuana, if someone smuggled that in, usually the guards do that for you. If you got caught with smuggled weed, you went to solitary confinement for 2 weeks. So what's the difference between weed and fentanyl? Why are they weed smokers?
You know what I boil it down to, and it answers a lot of questions? Control. You ask, why does a Justin Trudeau do this? Why does a Klaus Schwab dream about it? Etc. It's just control. These people are control freaks that don't like freedom and don't like you making decisions for yourself. It's about control.
Yeah, it's sick. And if anyone out there who's thinking about investing in Canada, don't bother. What's the point? There's nothing left. This is what we all have to put up with. To remind everyone who came in late, I see our numbers grew over the last hour. Bill C-63, we've just spoken with Rob Anders here, who is a former member of Parliament who knows Trudeau on a personal basis here, is saying that Bill C-63 could get through. And could you please tell us, scale of 1 to 10, what are the odds? 10 being high.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm going to say it's better than 50%. I'm going to give it a 7.
Oh my God.
7 out of 10.
Yeah, and you were in Parliament for quite a few years, so if anyone's going to know, it's you. Frightening. I mean,
there is a chance the Senate amends it or blocks it. There is a chance that the other parties pull the trigger on the budget. We go to a spring election. There is a chance that there's backbench MPs inside the Liberal caucus, the Ontario caucus, who voice concerns about this and don't want to go forward with the Atlantic caucus is more socially conservative. So there are some of those chances, but I'm going to give it a better than 50% chance. I'm going to go as high as 7 out of 10 to say that this passes.
That's unreal. By the way, everybody watching on TikTok over here, could you please just go rapid fire 2 fingers like this and just keep liking this video? It really does help the algorithm get me found. If you like this kind of content, we're going to bring more of it, but you got to give us likes. We got 7,000 likes right here. Let's get to 20,000 before the end of the show if we can. Just rapid fire. Everybody watching on Rumble, I notice you haven't all pushed the like button yet. If you're watching on computer, it's right below where Rob's face is right now. Just it's a thumbs up. Just go click right on top. That also helps. We're getting really good numbers these days on Rumble because we've been getting so many likes. So I do appreciate that in its entirety. We have another slide that we have to go to here. We got a few more of these. Let's bring this back up. It's a very, very disturbing photograph, and I feel horrible for anyone who's ever look.
And I also want to point out to people that they think, oh, well, that's a century ago. In North Korea in the 1990s, 3 million people starved to death. Right? In Venezuela, people are going through other people's garbage, as you say, starving, cannibalism. Like this isn't just 100 years ago, folks. And when you look at where this plan could take us, let me tell you, this is not far away if we keep on this track.
Yeah. Sorry. Don't forget also, if you ever hear the term long pig, that's the Asian term for human meat. So decline it. All right, guys? Decline it. Ed, what's up?
Is this slide referring to the Holodomor that happened in the Ukraine?
The Holodomor, yeah. So what happened was about 4 million people starved to death in 1921. Okay, but then in 1932-33, there was another 7 million people that starved to death. This stuff, and I'm talking about in 21 here, this is a lot of it related to the collapse of the money and the currency. The one that happened later was a much more targeted genocide against kulaks and Ukrainians, the farmers that were holding out against the Soviet Stalin.
Yeah, so this is why I always refer to communists as those murdering scumbag communists as opposed to just socialist communists. Let's call them what they are. They're murdering scumbag communists. Let's be real clear about this.
Well,
Trudeau.
my family was over in that neck of the woods previous to World War One, and then with everything that happened in 1917, they left, and we had our horses, our granaries, our lands all taken from us, and left in the middle of the night, crossing over the battle zones, over the front lines.
Yeah, my family, my mom's side also lost property in former Yugoslavia after the Second World War, and my mom's uncle came to Canada right after the First World War because former Yugoslavia was left decimated, and before it had been quite the thriving economy. And having cousins that were growing up in former Yugoslavia, I would save money and buy a cousin a spray paint can, like one of those power sprayers, because I knew the guy was a painter. I says, this should speed things up. Maybe he can make some more money. That's what started his business, that Binks $200 or $250 spray can, which was not available in the 70s or late 70s. Just couldn't afford it. But once he had that gun, the compressor, he was able to start spraying, and he became self-employed after that. But without that gun, no chance of getting ahead. Just none. And that's socialism, people.
Yeah. Sorry, Rob, I got a question here in the TikTok room, which is actually pretty good. Brown Eyes Blue is asking, can we ask if Trudeau will be held to account for anything that he's done?
Well, I sure hope so. Like I said, I think the most treasonous act, he's done a lot of terrible things. But when you buy so many jabs off of China, after you know that they used your biohazards lab in Winnipeg to take out COVID and to weaponize those things and turn them into the Wuhan laboratory, disaster that was, and you go ahead and you buy that much jab material off of them, enough 8 times for every man, woman, child. If that's not treasonous, I don't know. Like, it's treasonous enough to allow them access to the biohazards lab, but then after you know and you cover up what they've done to go ahead and buy those jabs off them, I don't know how you argue that's not treason.
Why does Canada have a biohazard lab in Winnipeg?
Well, I guess you could say that any country, if you're going to be dealing with Ebola and you're going to be dealing with COVID and SARS and, various things, you want to be able to have some place where you can, understand this stuff, whatever. But I think there does have to be a reckoning with regard to this idea of weaponizing or with gain of function. Like the rationale that they would use is to say, oh, well, if we give it gain of function, then we can anticipate how it could potentially harm a human population. But I think it's quite obvious with COVID that gain of function was used to kill people. And it wasn't just in a lab. It wasn't just experimentation. It was used to weaponize and kill people. My own father died after his 3rd jab. And it was hard for my mother to accept that it might have been the jabs that done it. But my dad was a very healthy guy, better cardio than me, ate better than I did, way less fat, etc. And yet he died of a massive heart attack. No doctor would have said that. Nobody would have predicted that of my father. And it turns out he was one of many in the seniors complex that my mother and father lived in out in BC. So people have to come to terms with the fact that, that was weaponized and it was done to harm.
Yeah, well, let's hope then. We actually don't know because there's no confidence vote in Canada, is there, that could remove him? Is there actually a way to remove the prime minister aside from his party removing him?
Well, you can have a no confidence vote, but it depends on how Jagmeet Singh or the Bloc Québécois are going to vote. I think that the Conservatives would vote in a heartbeat to remove him from office, but you have to have those other parties, because it's a coalition situation, a minority government, to be able to vote to also remove him. And I'm frankly surprised that the caucuses inside the Liberal Party, like the Atlantic Caucus, which is more on the socially conservative side, or the Ontario Caucus, which is watching their numbers plummet and go through the floor, usually when a prime minister, when his numbers, when the party's numbers are below the opposition, which they have been for quite some time, and when his personal numbers, the prime minister's personal numbers, are below that of his party, he is therefore the drag. He is the one dragging it down. And most other leaders in those circumstances would leave, but Mr. Trudeau is not. And I think it's partly because he's trying to cover his backside. He realizes just how complicit he is with regard to these treasonous acts. And I think he's hanging in there to the bitter end, hoping that he's going to be able to crash this whole thing around him, stay in power, stay ahead of the RCMP, stay ahead of charges that are pending, etc. But yeah, he deserves to go.
He does.
And I'll say this, I give credit to Liberals like Stephen Ledrew, former president of the Liberal Party, and Dan McTeague, a former member of Parliament whom I served with, that are also calling for his ouster. Those are Liberals who are sticking, their necks out and going out on a limb to recognize that this guy is acting, egregiously and doesn't deserve to be the leader of the party or the country. I applaud them, because that's not partisan. Those are people who are longtime Liberals with, their skin invested in the game that want to see him gone.
So let's get back then now to our history lesson here in reference to communism and the destruction of money. So I'll bring the slide back up. This, again, was the young boy that ate his sibling. Definitely wasn't happy about it. But now we want to talk about calories. So we have McDonald's fries here. I just have to say this to McDonald's. I know you didn't pay us to put those logos here, and this image is fair use. So don't bother sending me any more letters from your lawyers. Okay, go ahead.
So what I'm demonstrating here is you think about all the food that we eat in any given day. Well, the calorie intake in the Soviet Union, when they were trying to get rid of money, dropped from 3,820 calories a day down to 2,680. And that's the equivalent of 3 poutines down to 2. And I'm not talking a juice with that. I'm not talking a milk with that. I'm not talking a Coke with that. That's just that. And end of story, period. And these are the people who lived. Obviously, there were 10 million who starved to death, who didn't get this many calories, who starved to death. But this is for the people who lived through it.
All right. And not that you should be eating 3 containers of poutine a day. This is just a visual reference. That's all that it is. All right. Next slide. Go ahead. What do we have here?
Yeah, so this demonstrates how serious the situation got, where these people who were determined, obstinate to eliminate money, finally had to turn to the British to print up a silver kopeck in 1921, of which, like I said, I actually have a copy here because I want people to understand, this is all very real. And then by 1923, they were printing up gold kopecks. They had to stoop to once again dealing in gold, because the Soviet experiment was about to perish from the face of the earth with everybody starving to death. So even they had to relinquish on this absolutely ridiculous idea of eliminating money. But mark my words, folks, this central bank digital currency stuff is on this path for control and elimination.
Yeah, we're actually going to be a bit more in depth about that. So let's finish off our slideshow here and talk about digital currency. All right, we got Trudeau kissing somebody in the top left corner. Who's that?
Oh, that's Fidel Castro.
No, his daddy. His father.
There's Fidel Castro and Justin going in for the hug, and Margaret Trudeau looking fondly on as the two of them embrace. Pictures speak 1,000 words, folks. I'll let you make your own judgments there.
No, I'm going to say it. You don't say it. I'll say it. Look at the love in Justin Trudeau's mother's eyes in this picture, looking at Castro. She had to have slept with him, man. Like this the kid looks like him. Now, we also remember that Justin Trudeau's parents, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was the prime minister twice, he and his wife, they were weirdos, drug users, and swingers. And Trudeau would parade his wife around. Did she sleep with Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones at Club 54 in New York?
I understand that there's Mick Jagger. I understand Geraldo Rivera. There were Moroccan artists. Like I think there's a bit of a list there.
Yeah, we know there's a list because there's always that photograph of Justin Trudeau's mother wearing no panties, sitting down on the floor, and you can see everything. I didn't want to see everything, but you can see everything. So they lived a very unusual lifestyle. And there's also, of course, the floating rumors that Trudeau's senior, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was pimping her out to gain political favor with others. And she really wasn't that hot. So, I mean, how desperate were these guys he was pimping her out to?
It's, I think if Justin Trudeau would be willing to tell the entire family background of what he experienced as a child, I think we would be shocked.
I think we'd all be sick to our stomachs. Ed, you had something to add?
Yeah, let's not forget that Fidel Castro's oldest son, he had many kids. He died about 4 or 5 years ago, but on his deathbed, he always resented Justin Trudeau because in Fidel's eyes, he was the best. He was his favorite son.
I want to validate what you've said because I know people from Latin America, Venezuelans who have left that country as political refugees, who are very connected to the political system down there, involved with the Christian Democrats, and have met. Okay, I know people who've met Maduro and Chavez and Castro and know these people, and they all corroborate what you've just said.
Wow. And the mainstream media won't cover any of this stuff. Nobody on the left wing will cover this stuff. And the weird part of it is the radical leftist LGBTQs out there, they want everyone to be gay. Trudeau comes out and says he is gay, and we know about his mother's escapades. You figured that they'd all be proud to talk about this stuff, and they're not. It's everything just a big scam. Everyone's hiding everything all the time, and the only people that lose are the Canadian people who actually care about their country.
Yeah, he's engaging in some profoundly unpatriotic acts, whether it's trampling grandmothers in Ottawa, or what he's trying to do with central bank digital currency, or buying the jabs off the Chinese when you already know they were weaponizing that stuff in Wuhan. There's the list just goes on and on.
Well, it goes on too. It's not just diseases that he was selling or giving, I guess, to China, and not just water he's giving to China. But people don't know this. The Native Indians, they reintroduced the fur trade again up in the Northwest Territories. I remember this. It's been going on for 25 years now because I remember seeing the original insurance bid to send beaver meat and beaver skins and beaver tails to China. There was 3 insurance companies. Zurich Insurance in Toronto was one of them, trying to actually get this bid. And of course, the government was flipping the bill for the whole thing. So we're just giving everything away. Canada gives away its wood to China. China mills it into pressboard or plywood and sends it back to us and sells it back to us. Why are we not milling our own wood? Rob, what's going on?
So something to add to that, the Canada Wheat Board, farmers in Western Canada were selling wheat to the Canadian Wheat Board below world market prices. And then Paul Martin had the exclusive contract with Canada Steamship Lines to take that Canadian wheat bought below market prices to sell and transport to China. Okay. So he was benefiting out of that. The company was benefiting out of that. And Canadian farmers were going to jail because they wanted to get fair market value for their wheat. And I remember I worked at the National Citizens Coalition, and we were helping those guys with regard to some of their expenses and legal bills and whatnot, where they were fighting that. And that was just a travesty that Canadians were having to sell wheat below market prices, forced to by that monopoly, by that legislation, and jailed if they didn't, to subsidize China.
Yeah. And Paul Martin, who was the previous prime minister, like a few prime ministers ago, he reflagged his ships to, was it Cuba or was it Panama? So he wouldn't have to pay all the additional fees entering Canadian waters.
Yeah, he had his ships. I think it was, I'm trying to remember which country it was now. But anyhow, he flagged his ships outside of Canada to be able to save money, and so he didn't have to pay Canadian rates. That's right.
Wow. So there you go. A prime minister was stealing wheat from Canadian farmers, jailing them for complaining about it, selling it to China cheap, and Canada got no benefit from any of that. My God. The older I get,
So when you look at these pictures of Justin Trudeau, either hugging up to Fidel there, or to the Chinese communist dictators, do you trust him? Fundamentally, do you trust him with this stuff? And I'll show you, where this stuff is going in terms of central bank digital currency. Yeah.
Let's do that right now. Moving on. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about China, because it's a big factor in this. They used to have these, paper yuans, right?
Right.
But the problem in China, okay, is that their own people don't trust their government. So in China, if you've got some money, you would rather buy a piece of property in Vancouver, not live in it, and have it sprout weeds than you would rather put your money into the Chinese banking system because you don't trust your own government. That's why the Vancouver market is as bizarro as it is, because there's all this money that's flooding out. Anytime that China sets its currency up on a free-floating thing, on a forest exchange, where it can float with the other currencies, money floods out of that country because they don't trust it and they want to get it out. Okay, so China loves central bank digital currency because if you only have a currency that's issued by the Chinese government and nobody else has a free float on this, and you only have a currency that's controlled by the Bank of Canada or FedNow with the US Treasury, okay, they all set their rates for their exchange rates. There's no free exchange. There's no cash. You can't go to a taxi cab driver in Shanghai or Beijing or Ottawa or Washington and exchange it for different than the government rate. So dictators love central bank digital currency because it allows them to fix the rates with all the other central banks, and that's it. There's no private flow of this stuff. And so when you look at China, for example, they fear Bitcoin, right? They want to peg it to other things with other central banks. And in China, if you go ahead and you criticize the government, it'll affect whether or not you can apply for a government job, your pay. Can you get plane tickets, train tickets, bus tickets, face fines? The government can expose expiration dates on your money, saying that within 6 months, your digital yuan will disappear unless you invest it how they want you to invest it, etc. This system is now being brought into other countries like Nigeria that were trying to do their digital currency, and then as it fails because people don't want to adopt it, they go, no problem, we're going to put you on the Chinese digital yuan, right? These are the people ultimately who are driving this stuff, and Justin Trudeau is complicit.
Oh, completely complicit. I mean, well, Biden is complicit as well. New York City has already implemented 15-minute city cameras to bill cars something like $24 just for driving into Manhattan. And in the city of Edmonton in Canada will be the first official 15-minute city. I drove around that entire city taking photographs of all the camera balls and all the infrared balls out there that can take pictures at night, and posted it everywhere. Now, I got arrested for that. They let me go. Actually, that was the quickest catch and release. I got arrested. I sat in the back of the car for 15 minutes. They made phone calls to the boss. Something about them not wanting to prosecute for photographs because I was already too famous because of arrests.
You might have. You see, the problem is you might have been drawing attention to their 15-minute city plans. You see
that yes, probably. So
yeah.
they let me go, and that's the quickest arrest ever. And then they said, okay, there's no charges, but you got to stop doing this. Yes, officer. Just let them think they win. Yes, officer, and walked away. Wow. But Edmonton is going to be the first one. And they are, the city council of Edmonton is very proudly showing videos, really well animated videos, I might add, explaining how great this is, how wonderful it is, because we're saving the planet. But Rob, go ahead.
I want to tell you,
we're carbon negative. That's all I got to say. We're carbon negative in this country. Go ahead.
I want to tell you a story. I remember sitting on transport committee meetings in Ottawa. Now, my father was excited because he was a choo-choo guy. He worked for CN Rail. So he was excited I was on transport. For me, I found it boring. But I will say this, that was the first time I ever heard about smart cities. And it was all about these cameras, and it was all about being able to track how many people were waiting at a light, and therefore, depending on the backups at the light, it could go between, green and red and try to facilitate traffic flow. And I remember listening to this stuff because it was all about traffic flow and efficiency. And I thought, why would we go through this massive expense to put in all these cameras to do all this? This sounds like big government, Orwellian, big brother, expensive, controlling. Why the hell would we want that? But little did I realize that the cameras would eventually be able to track individual license plates and be able to ascribe fines to people who drove too much, used too much gasoline, went into London or, Edmonton or New York or whatever too often, etc. But I remember thinking at the time when I first saw it, I thought there's something nefarious and big government and evil about this. And of course, it was worse than I imagined.
Yeah. And well, I can't tell you to do so. I can just say that without electricity, it all fails. And all of Canada's power cords, cables, are on towers that could very easily be brought down with a bulldozer and a chain. I'm not saying do it. I'm just saying that is, they didn't really think it through. That is the quickest way to solve that the 15-minute city problem. Don't do it. That's against the law. I'm just getting to a point there. Yes, Ed.
Okay, so during the USSR, Soviet era, former Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito, a lot of these countries had black markets going on. And actually, in former Yugoslavia, they had the official currency was a dinar under the socialist system, murderous communist socialist system. Sorry about that. Got to clarify. You could not buy a tractor with dinars. You had to use Deutschmarks. And where did you get Deutschmarks? Black market, working under the table, begging, borrowing, stealing, selling your fruit for Deutschmarks instead of dinars. I think we're going to have a secondary currency, and I hope it's going to be silver coins.
Well, in Weimar Germany, things got so bad that people would take, say, for example, gold or silver necklaces and cut them up into their individual links. And then one link of silver might be a loaf of bread, one link of gold, might be something else, etc. But that's what it got to.
So I know a lot of preppers out there are hoarding it. They've buried it. And I'm sure one of them will admit to owning a single piece.
Well, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was doing his stuff with regard to the fighting the Depression, etc., back in the 30s, they made it illegal to own gold because the government wanted to have a monopoly on gold, so the private ownership didn't drive the prices up. But they never actually, they cajoled a lot of people, they kind of harassed them, but they never actually sent anybody to jail for owning gold. But, the way things are going these days and with Mr. Trudeau, I don't know. I really don't know where that's going to go.
How about with all the gun legislation, the buyback? That was a hugely successful program. I think, was it in the gazillions amounts of guns that got turned in for that?
Well, I'm sad, to admit that a lot of people gave away or gave up their guns. I believe that guns are equal with freedom, and that private gun ownership is the hallmark of freedom. It's one of the most cherished rights. And if a government doesn't trust you with guns, beware. Bad things are about to happen. And there's a great history of where gun confiscation leads to genocide. And I do a presentation on that. It's very sad.
I'll just cover very quickly for those who don't know. I've said this many times on the show, but Australians gave up their guns when the government said, "Give us your guns," and they went, "Okay," because it's going to be safer if we give up our guns. So they all gave up their pistols. And what happened is rapes and home invasions went up 800% in the first 30 days. Now, think about what happens when you give up your guns. The criminals don't give up their guns. And there are bad cops out there. There are psychotic cops out there who they know the law and they know if they commit crimes that all they got to do is say, "Hey, guys, it was me. I screwed up. Let me go." And they'll get away with it. So when you can't shoot at someone coming into your house, then you will just end up giving away your stuff, or worse, you'll be giving away your children's chastity to the rapist who wants just that one thing. I'll tell you, it's ridiculous. But we're running a bit low on time here. All right, so let's get back to our slideshow here. Next slide. Go ahead. What happened here?
So this is where it's being done and tested in other places. So on April 18th, 1980, the Zimbabwean dollar was worth more than the US dollar. And subsequent, in 99, 2009, there was a drop in food production, inability to obtain loans, manufacturing fell, year after year after year, excessive money creation, government violence to stifle political opposition, mining declined, banks restricted the ability to withdraw currency. That happens in almost all these situations. And there you had a situation where by 2008, So 28 years later, $1 was the equivalent of 2 billion plus Zimbabwean dollars, right? And
Wow.
so,
Yeah, look at that, 2,621,900. Sorry, is that 2,621,984,228? So $1 was worth 2.6 billion.
there you go.
Yeah, and
So
didn't they print $1 trillion notes?
Yeah, I've got some of those in my collection. That's right. And so the finance minister said in 2015 that the yuan would be their main reserve currency, right? So they're switching over to this digital yuan. Okay. Once again, you notice China. China's involved in the Wuhan COVID stuff. China's involved in the digital currency, central bank digital currency in Zimbabwe. Okay. And so out of 9 legal currencies that are accepted in Zimbabwe, 90% prefer to use the US dollar and 5% the South African rand. But I'm just telling people this central bank digital currency stuff, this Chinese digital yuan, it's not just here, it's spreading around, and you can look at what's happening in other countries to measure what's going on.
For those who also don't know, these Chinese infrastructure projects out there, like Pakistan is pretty much owned by China now, where China would loan it a ton of money, which they just create from nothing, essentially. And they built new shipping ports and that new highway that can get stuff into the mountain ranges. And then, of course, Pakistan can't pay. So China says, hey, don't worry about it, man. We'll write that debt off, but we own the highways and we own all your shipping ports. Now, when I was in Myanmar with Adrian there back in 2018, we were in the town of Sitwe, which only had one traffic light in the whole town. Very, very bustling town. But China was actually building a brand new shipping port that could have fit at least one oil tanker within it. That's how big it was. Small by comparison to other countries. But the Burmese army said, you know what? We're not going to give this to China. China's calling in the debt. We said no. And that's where the issue kind of fired up in the western half of that country, where the Burmese army was actually throwing Chinese diplomats out, saying, you're out of here. I don't like the fact that they incarcerated interim president Aung San Suu Kyi. I was actually very upset about that. And unfortunately, when the Burmese army said no to China, then the Islamic groups began fighting with everybody again. And then the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army started killing people again. And then the actual Rakhine people said, you know, now's our chance for independence. So there's a 4-way civil war going on in that country ever since. And all because China wanted to take over one shipping port. It's that easy to trigger a war in a country. Thank you, China, for that. Unreal. Next slide. What do we have here?
Sure. So what they do when they want to eliminate currency and get rid of money is first they eliminate the large bills, right? So they'll get rid of the hundreds and the 50s. And by the way, if I held up a Canadian note right now, you would notice that it has Queen Elizabeth II on it, and so would all of our coins. Right. Well, therefore, the excuse is to take those out of circulation. We have to get rid of those because she's no longer the monarch, you see. Right. And also, when you take into account June 30th, the House of Commons lets out at about June 15th or so. So once they've gone for the summer, that means that Trudeau would have all of July, all of August, and most of September to go ahead and wreak his havoc on the banking system with central bank digital currency. Some of the other things they do, they restrict account access. They claim there's a currency shortage, right? And then, you know, usually in these countries, for example, like Nigeria, okay, was once again following in these Chinese footsteps, like Zimbabwe, okay, with the digital currency, and riots result, okay. You see there a picture with them taking all these small bills in wheelbarrows because all the large bills have been taken out of circulation.
That's money in the wheelbarrows?
That is money in wheelbarrows, yes.
And that's okay. So Canada, we used to have the $1,000 bill. They were called pinkies. Now, the Canadian government took them out of circulation because they said it was too easy to sell drugs or whatnot with them. That's a lie, isn't it? Why'd they really take them out?
Well, they can claim that that's the reason, and that it sounds like a plausible reason, just like it sounds plausible to say we're going to take the $20 bills and the coins out of circulation because they got the Queen on them and she's not the monarch anymore. It's Charles. But whenever you're doing this, you're taking currency out of circulation. And of course, what they want to replace it with, their plan, is central bank digital currency. And like I said, you can see it in Zimbabwe. You can see it in Nigeria. You can see what they're doing in China with the social credit system. In Canada, they don't call it social credit. They call it ESG, environmental social governance. So if you are too big a carbon footprint for them, right, then you can have all these things happen, which means they can evaporate your money. They can press an end to it with a press of a button. They can say it expires in 6 months. You have to invest in an electric vehicle or some other such scheme they want you to do. Watch out, folks. It's happening in other countries, and they want to bring it here.
Yeah, and they'll get away with it too, I'm sure. All right, next. What do we have here?
Well, so in El Salvador, what they've done is they said they're going to go with Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is better than having a central bank digital currency because it's something different. It's not a central bank. But, with central bank digital currency, it's having all of those things that Bitcoin has, but now controlled by a central bank. So, for example, like if I use my card with the Alberta Treasury Branch and I go and buy gasoline or fuel, ATB knows that I bought gasoline and fuel, but they don't have to relate that to the government of Canada. But if we're in central bank digital currency, everything that I do becomes knowledge instantaneously of the Bank of Canada. So if I buy ammunition, if I buy fuel, if I buy condoms, if a woman goes and buys a pregnancy test, all that stuff, once cash is gone, is all traceable, trackable by the central bank.
And it's going to kill simple cash exchanges.
Of course.
Well, yeah, I mean, yard sales, garage sales, it's going to kill that. So everyone's going to get stuck with a whole bunch of stuff that they don't need anymore.
Yeah.
And they can't even sell it because there's no way to tap for it. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Alexa with Rebel Media did an expose, a segment about that, where when a homeless person, for example, is begging for change to buy a coffee or whatever type of thing, you don't have that to give them, right? What happens to the people that don't normally have bank accounts? The homeless, for example, what do they do?
Yeah. Well, the other one, Rob, is that, in Calgary, I was living there for almost 3 years. There was a couple of nights we went out and we spoke to the homeless. We interviewed a lot of them just to get a sense of the city. And then we also spoke to a lot of the prostitutes out there, and none of them have bank accounts. They don't have Coho cards. They don't have Tangerine accounts. They have no way to get paid for their services aside from cash. So that industry is going to dry up. And there's a problem with that. Some of these people, and I feel horrible for the ones that have to do this for a living. I really do. But they're not going to make any money anymore. How do they make money with no skills? That's all they know. The other thing is going to be that every single time a society has removed prostitution from its society, rapes skyrocket because prostitutes keep the perverts, the crazies at bay. It's a bad move. It's a very, very bad move.
I'll also say this, like, I'm not going to justify prostitution, but I will say this, that if you understand the history of incest, a huge proportion of women who are engaged in either pornography or prostitution have been the victims of sexual assault and incest with a step family member or a family member or what have you. And so you have to understand that in their mind, having sex with a stranger for money is better than having sex with a relative for free. And I know that is a profound and ugly thought, but that is the reality of how this, psychologically works sometimes. And there'll be many profound consequences with a central bank digital currency.
Many of which we haven't even addressed or thought of yet.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
All right, next slide. So what's going on here?
Well, this just goes to show that central bank digital currency, I mean, obviously the Chinese benefit from this. Obviously, control freak governments benefit from this. Any dictator who wants to be able to set a fixed exchange rate with other countries so that their money doesn't flood out because their citizens don't trust them benefits from this. And this Klaus Schwab character, this World Economic Forum, I think we've all learned a great deal about some of these characters in the last few years since COVID reared its head. I have books in my library that were printed in 2002 about the coming reset in 2030. So some of these characters have been plotting some of this stuff for decades.
And Klaus Schwab, his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, he talks at length about the fact that they do want to destroy everything in order to get this one world currency and one world government into play. And he's even the one that says, and this was mind-numbing when I read his actual documentation on this. He said that we need to have white people either disappear or be bred out of existence because they're the ones most likely to rebel. Whereas he was talking about Asians are the most likely to do what they're told. So, wow. You ever wonder why, like, white people are what, 9% of the world now? This guy's been at this for quite some time. This man is a maniac.
Yeah, there's a lot of these guys who I think a lot of us didn't take them at face value because we thought they were cranks, they were off on a pet issue, etc. But when you realize what's transpired with the world over the last few years and what some of the plans, what the documented things they've said that they want to implement are still pending, it's absolutely frightening. Will Dove, I want to give him some credit, a shout out here in Calgary, has on January 24th, he did an expose on this situation with the Bank Act in Canada. I believe it's Section 21, where they've changed that and modified it to eliminate the banks and to come up with this expiry date of June 30th of next year. But yeah, I want people to understand all this stuff, and there's ways we can change it. Either A, if there's an election to get rid of Trudeau, B, if we amend the Bank Act to get rid of that expiry date, C, if provincial premiers with their provincially regulated financial institutions say that those institutions have to peg 3% of their assets, for example, to gold, silver, maybe copper, maybe oil, because that way it's a bulwark against Trudeau trying to collapse the federal currency. And 4 is if the centrally chartered banks themselves, the big banks in Canada, establish provincial alternatives, provincial branches or versions of themselves, and put assets into those so that if Trudeau tries to crash them, it makes it much, much harder jurisdictionally.
Do you think it's possible that the provinces would be able to actually have their own currencies that are backed by a commodity? Like Alberta could have its own currency, could it not, backed by oil or potash?
Well, in a sense, historically, that was the case. I mean, you talked about, say, for example, those banks, Bank of Nova Scotia, the Bank of Upper Canada. You have the banks of Montreal, Halifax, etc. That, in effect, is what we had in the private banking system that was allowed. Alberta tried that with regard to the prosperity certificates under the social credit government. It was ruled ultra vires, but certainly the Calgary Stampede has issued, dollars in the past. And I would say that if Alberta, for example, says that 3% of the financial institutions provincially regulated have to peg to gold, silver, copper, or oil, we are creating a bulwark against what Trudeau is trying to do federally. And I would encourage Saskatchewan, Ontario, and other right-thinking governments to do the same.
Yeah, I like that idea. Getting back to our slideshow here, what do we have here? What is this?
Well, this is an example of the Alberta Prosperity Certificate. The Alberta Treasury Branch, for example, was set up in 1938 in Rocky Mountain House. Alf Hook was the longest-serving member of the legislature for the Social Credit Party. And this was an attempt by Alberta to kind of go its own way during the Great Depression. Aberhart entered into politics because a boy in his class, the father committed suicide, and he didn't want to see this type of thing continue. But I also show these Calgary Stampede dollars, which, sometimes only lasted for the duration of the Stampede. Other times went until the end of the year in December. We do have histories of doing these types of things in the country. And I point back again to that wonderful free banking example we had from 1817 to 1914. Canada should be proud of what we had at that time. And I hope that we move back towards something like that.
I would love that very, very much. All right. We're almost done the slideshow, folks.
Yeah, this just goes to show all these Stampede coins that were printed. So it's not as though this type of thing hasn't been done before. Just today, I was dealing with silver dollars, that show that we actually used to have real money, and we should go back to having real money.
I agree. And those are beautiful coins. Are those all silver coins?
Those ones, I think a good chunk of them are post 1968, so they're probably not silver per se, but a lot of coins that were done previous to 1968 were silver.
Amazing. All right, what do we have here?
Well, this is just an example of the provincially incorporated financial institutions. So their mandate is to operate in a safe and sound manner. And if you go back to England, Sir Robert Peel's Bank Act in 1844, 1913 was the creation of the Federal Reserve Act in the United States. In 1971, Nixon pulled the US dollar off of the gold standard because he was worried that Charles de Gaulle was going to repatriate the French gold from Fort Knox, bring it back to France. But I think there's always a reckoning when you move away from the gold standard. So when these first were brought in, you had to have 25% of your assets tied to gold. Eventually, when it was revoked in 71 in the United States, it was down to 3%. Therefore, I suggest, and I know that Brett Olin with the Bow Valley Credit Union based out of Cochrane here in Alberta, he also agrees with me that we have to go back to having our currencies based in gold. He himself, his bank is committing to 10% of its assets being in gold. But we agree that if you had all the Alberta institutions commit to 3% in gold, silver, copper, or something like oil, it provides something real as the backing for the currency.
Well, that's something I've wanted to see for quite some time. And as far as I understand, this is what had Muammar Gaddafi murdered, because he was actually talking about forming an African currency that was going to be backed by oil and gold. He was talking about both. So obviously the Americans couldn't have that, because that African currency would have probably competed as well as the euro, if not more. So Gaddafi, well, the Americans lied to us about who was responsible for select terror bombings, and they went after that guy. And what bothers me about that, Rob, is that when Gaddafi was in charge of his country, Libya, he had a literacy rate of 100%. His people loved him. There's video of him just like no guards, just he's waving like this, standing out of his limousine, out of the roof of it, and people are chasing him, throwing roses at him. His people loved him. If you stayed in Libya and had kids, you got paid for.
Gaddafi's a complicated character. He was training the IRA and various other terrorists in the Libyan desert back there a while ago, so he's a complicated character. I by the way, I applaud anybody who wants to have a more sound currency and go back to basing it in something like gold and silver and whatever. I think that's real, and it prevents the government from just printing money and central bank digital foolishness and everything else. He was a complicated character. I think he's got a lot more elements to him than just a gold currency or something.
Oh, sure. But I think any world leader's got that. You can't become a world leader unless you're complicated and crooked. That's just how it is. Right? So
maybe that's true.
This show runs every single Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Mountain Time on freedomreport.ca. Thank you for being here. I love you all, and good night.